Out of every 100 reconnaissance troops sent behind enemy lines in World War II, only 6 ever made it back home alive. They had a life expectancy of just 48 hours once deployed, but they were described as the eyes and ears of the entire Allied war machine, and at the same time the most expendable soldiers on the battlefield. But their story is far more horrific than it seems, and now you're going to see why. When people talk about World War II intelligence gathering, they usually mention code breakers like those at Bletchley Park or spy networks in occupied Europe. But reconnaissance troops were a different kind of operation altogether. These were small teams of specially trained soldiers whose job was to penetrate deep behind enemy lines and gather critical intelligence that could change the course of entire campaigns. The Allies desperately needed real-time information about German troop movements, defensive positions, and supply lines. Aerial reconnaissance could only tell you so much. Photographs from 20,000 feet couldn't reveal the thickness of bunker walls, the number of troops in a garrison, or the exact location of ammunition dumps. That's where reconnaissance troops came in. They were the human eyes and ears that could get close enough to count enemy soldiers, map defensive positions, and identify weak points that bombers and artillery could exploit. But getting that information meant crossing enemy lines, moving through hostile territory for days or weeks, and somehow making it back alive to report what they'd seen. The Germans, of course, knew the value of intelligence gathering too. They had patrols, guard posts, and an entire network designed to catch exactly these kinds of infiltrators. And when they caught them, reconnaissance troops weren't treated like regular prisoners of war. To understand why being a reconnaissance trooper was such a nightmare, we need to take a look at how these operations actually worked. Most reconnaissance missions were carried out by teams of 3 to 6 men, specially selected for their physical fitness, navigation skills, and ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. They carried lightweight gear weighing about 40 pounds total. No heavy weapons, no radios that could give away their position, and minimal food and water to last maybe 72 hours. Their primary weapon was usually a suppressed pistol or submachine gun with just enough ammunition for emergencies. The idea was to avoid contact entirely, not fight their way out. Each team member had specific responsibilities. The team leader handled navigation and mission objectives. The radio operator carried the only communication device, a compact field radio weighing 15 pounds that could transmit back to Allied lines from up to 20 miles away. The observer documented enemy positions, troop strength, and equipment. Others provided security and backup. But here's the thing. Your effective operational window was incredibly narrow. Intelligence had to be fresh to be useful, which meant teams often had less than 48 hours to infiltrate, observe, and extract before the information became outdated. And moving through enemy territory at night, you could cover maybe 10 miles if the terrain was favorable. Once behind enemy lines, reconnaissance troops faced constant psychological pressure. Every sound could mean discovery. Every German patrol could mean death or capture. Sleep was almost impossible. You'd catch maybe an hour or two during daylight, hidden in whatever cover you could find, always listening for approaching footsteps. Being captured alive was perhaps the biggest fear. Because of their mission to gather intelligence about German positions and strength, reconnaissance troops weren't treated like regular POWs. They were considered spies, which meant immediate execution under German military law. But before that execution, interrogators would do everything possible to extract information about Allied plans and the location of other reconnaissance teams. The mental strain was incredible. You'd watch German soldiers from maybe 50 yards away, close enough to see their faces, count their weapons, observe their routines, all while knowing that if just one of them spotted you, your mission was over and your life was forfeit. In May 1944, 3 weeks before D-Day, Staff Sergeant Michael O'Brien led a 4-man reconnaissance team on what would become one of the most critical intelligence missions of the war. Their objective was to penetrate German coastal defenses near Omaha Beach and provide detailed information about bunker positions, machine gun nests, and beach obstacles. O'Brien's team was dropped by boat 15 miles behind German lines at 2 a.m. on a moonless night. The plan was simple. Move inland, observe German positions for 24 hours, and rendezvous with a submarine for extraction. What they found was far worse than Allied intelligence had estimated. The Germans had turned the entire coastline into a death trap. Concrete bunkers were positioned every 200 yards with overlapping fields of fire. Machine gun nests were hidden in fake farmhouses. Artillery positions were dug into hillsides and camouflaged with netting and vegetation. For 18 hours, O'Brien's team crawled through German positions, mapping every bunker, counting every weapon, documenting angles of fire. They were so close to German sentries that they could hear conversations, smell cigarette smoke, and watch soldiers eating their meals. Then disaster struck. Private Thompson, the team's radio operator, accidentally knocked over a metal bucket while moving through a farmyard. The clatter echoed through the night silence like a gunshot. Within seconds, German voices were shouting orders and flashlights were sweeping the area. O'Brien made a split-second decision. Instead of running, the team buried themselves in a manure pile behind the barn. For the next 6 hours, they lay motionless in human and animal waste, while German patrols searched the area with dogs. The smell was overwhelming. The temperature was suffocating. But they remained completely still. By nothing short of a miracle, the search moved on. O'Brien's team waited until dawn, then began their extraction under cover of morning fog. They reached the rendezvous point with intelligence that would save thousands of Allied lives on D-Day. All 4 men survived, though Thompson would later say those 6 hours in the manure pile were the longest of his life. But this wasn't the only case of reconnaissance troops beating impossible odds. In September 1944, Corporal James Mitchell's team was tasked with locating a German ammunition depot somewhere in the forests of eastern France. Intelligence suggested the depot was being used to supply German forces defending the Siegfried Line. Mitchell's 3-man team parachuted into enemy territory on a rainy night, but strong winds scattered them across 10 miles of forest. It took Mitchell 8 hours to locate his 2 teammates. Precious time that put them behind schedule and dangerously close to German patrol routes. When they finally found the ammunition depot, it was far larger than expected. Instead of a small supply dump, they discovered a massive underground facility carved into a hillside, heavily guarded and surrounded by minefields. But Mitchell knew this intelligence was critical for Allied artillery to target. As they observed the depot from a concealed position, a German patrol stumbled across their hiding spot. In the firefight that followed, both of Mitchell's teammates were killed. Mitchell himself took a bullet in the shoulder but managed to escape into the forest. For the next 72 hours, Mitchell evaded German search parties while trying to reach Allied lines 40 miles away. He had no food, minimal water, and a wounded shoulder that was becoming infected. German patrols were everywhere, using dogs to track him through the forest. On the 3rd night, delirious from fever and exhaustion, Mitchell walked directly into a German checkpoint. The guards assumed he was a lost Allied airman and prepared to take him prisoner. In broken German, Mitchell convinced them he was suffering from amnesia and couldn't remember his unit or mission. The Germans, believing they'd captured a traumatized airman with no useful intelligence, transported him to a POW collection point near Allied lines. During the transport, Mitchell overpowered his guard and escaped. He reached American forces the next morning with detailed intelligence about the ammunition depot, which was destroyed by Allied bombers within 48 hours. But if you think the previous stories were incredible, consider what happened to Lieutenant Robert Hayes in March 1945. Hayes led a 5-man reconnaissance team deep into Germany to gather intelligence about German defensive positions along the Rhine River. This was one of the most dangerous missions possible, penetrating the heart of Nazi Germany just months before the war's end. Hayes' team was inserted by glider, 60 miles behind German lines. Their mission was to locate German artillery positions that were preventing Allied forces from crossing the Rhine. What they discovered was a massive defensive network with hundreds of concealed guns positioned to devastate any Allied crossing attempt. For 3 days, the team moved through German positions, documenting gun emplacements, ammunition storage, and communication lines. They were operating in heavily populated areas where German civilians could spot them as easily as soldiers. Every village, every farm, every road was a potential trap. On their 4th night, while observing a major artillery position, Hayes' team was surrounded by an entire German company. Someone had spotted them and called in reinforcements. There was no escape route, no cover, and no hope of fighting their way out against 120 German soldiers. What happened next defies all military logic. Hayes ordered his team to strip off their uniforms and weapons, then march directly toward the German positions with their hands up, pretending to be escaped Allied POWs who had gotten lost trying to reach American lines. The deception worked initially. German soldiers, seeing 5 obviously lost and confused Allied prisoners, relaxed their guard. But Hayes had observed something critical during their reconnaissance. He'd noticed that German communication lines ran through a specific farmhouse that also served as a command post. As they were being escorted to the farmhouse for interrogation, Hayes' team simultaneously attacked their guards and sprinted toward the building. In the confusion, they reached the farmhouse and barricaded themselves inside while German soldiers surrounded the building. For 18 hours, Hayes' team held off German attacks while using captured German radio equipment to transmit intelligence about artillery positions directly to Allied forces. The information was so detailed and accurate that Allied artillery began counter-battery fire within minutes, destroying German gun positions based on Hayes' real-time targeting data. Against all odds, an Allied armored spearhead broke through German lines and reached the farmhouse just as Hayes' team ran out of ammunition. All 5 men survived what should have been a suicide mission, and their intelligence contributed directly to the successful Allied crossing of the Rhine River. The official statistics tell the horrific story of reconnaissance operations in World War II. Of approximately 15,000 Allied reconnaissance troops deployed behind enemy lines, only 900 returned alive. That's a 94% casualty rate, making it statistically the most dangerous military occupation of the entire war. These losses weren't in vain. Intelligence gathered by reconnaissance troops was responsible for preventing countless Allied casualties and shortening the war by an estimated 6 months. The detailed information about German coastal defenses at Normandy alone saved thousands of lives on D-Day. Artillery positions identified by reconnaissance teams were destroyed before they could devastate Allied advances. But the human cost was staggering. These were volunteers, men who knew the odds and accepted missions that were essentially one-way trips. They understood that their job was to gather intelligence that could save their fellow soldiers, even if it meant sacrificing their own lives in the process. The psychological trauma among the few survivors was severe. Many reconnaissance veterans suffered what we now recognize as PTSD for decades after the war. The constant stress of operating behind enemy lines, watching comrades die, and living with the knowledge that capture meant torture and execution left permanent scars. Today, modern technology has largely replaced human reconnaissance. Satellites, drones, and electronic surveillance can gather intelligence without risking human lives. But in World War II, there was no substitute for soldiers willing to walk into enemy territory and gather the information that could change the course of history. The story of reconnaissance troops reminds us that victory in war often depends on the courage of individuals willing to accept impossible odds. These men understood that their sacrifice could save thousands of other soldiers, and they accepted that responsibility without hesitation. If you want to hear more incredible stories of World War II heroism and survival, make sure to subscribe and check out our other videos about the most dangerous military roles in history. You won't believe what these soldiers endured to protect freedom and defeat fascism.